Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. This is episode 23. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea.
We've got another great show ready for you today. We have two guests coming to us today. Our first guest is Deb Robson. Tell us a bit about Deb.
Yes, Deb is very exciting. I interviewed her and you will see that at the end of this episode. She's an amazing woman. For 4 years, she intensely documented and studied and researched over 200 fibres, wool and fibre. And that became the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook, which is an extraordinary document for all fibre artists and wool users. So that meant that research included actually spinning with the wool and the fibres and swatching with them so she could truly understand them. So she's a wealth of knowledge and it was fascinating talking to her, and you'll get to meet her soon. We've also got our guest from Knitters of the World is coming from Northumberland, the UK, right up by the Scottish border. She's a great knitter. I'm totally in awe of her designs.
Yep.
And
that's Alix Pearson.
Alix Pearson. Andrew is planning a new project already.
That's right, planning.
Yes, and I'm taking a short detour into the world of sewing. Now, you have to excuse me because you can hear my voice is not good. I've actually been sick, so I won't talk too much today. Andrew, you're going to take over.
Right.
Yes. He will be teaching you how to cable without a cable needle. Bring and Brag is going to feature today. It's where we show our finished objects. So but this week I don't have a knitting one, I've got a sewing one. This is not going to turn into a sewing channel, so don't worry. It is very much a knitting channel. I'm a much better knitter than I am a sewer. So I'm not going to try to tell you some tricks and, and tips on sewing. But I did hurt my arm and I wanted to rest it. I thought it's better not to agitate my arm while it's healing. So for the last 2 weeks, I've done no knitting, and which was incredibly difficult. It's really hard not to do. But then I cheered myself up by thinking, okay, I will use my knitting time to do some sewing because I never have time to do both, that's for sure. And that made me a lot happier.
Oh, that's good, doll. That's a nice story in itself.
It is. It's very hard, as you all know, who are knitting addicts. It's impossible to sit on the couch and watch television, without knitting. It is so annoying not to be knitting. It's, to sit on a train, travelling somewhere and you haven't got your knitting. Everything is so boring.
I haven't reached that stage yet.
You haven't reached that stage.
No.
Okay, so if you remember, back in episode 2, we interviewed Brian from the Trefru Woolen Mills in Snowdonia. He was the head weaver, a lovely man. And while I was there, I bought some lovely tweed material where I was going to make myself a skirt from. Well, that material has stayed in my cupboard for a year now. I even showed you the material with great expectations in episode 2. Okay, it is now out of the cupboard and has been sewn up. So I'm going to stand up and show you what it looks like. So while I talk about it, you know what I'm talking about. So I'll just lift up my cardigan and you can see this is it here. What I love about this design is that we've got the diagonal creases here on the yoke of the skirt, and it's just the checkered squares down below. I'll turn around so you can see that it does fit me very well. Very proud of. One side I matched very well. Look at that. See all of these? They're going all in together. Very well done. This side isn't as well done. I don't know why. You can see they're not matching, but they sort of match up here. So I'm not experienced enough to know what the problem was, but... So that's my skirt. I'm very proud of myself, if I can say that on international television. My mother taught me to sew when I was about early teenager, but there's years go by and I don't sew at all. But it is a bit like riding a bike in the fact that you think you've forgotten it, but as soon as you start, it all sort of comes up and you remember. At least you remember what you learnt. I looked for a pattern and I found this McCall's pattern here. I really wanted to put in some pleats at the front, but I didn't have enough material to do that. So I ended up doing just the simple A-line version of it. But I was very much attracted the way they've got the tartan here on the diagonal and then underneath just the square. When you buy the wool, it says dry clean only, but I hate to dry clean clothes. I don't like it for the chemicals, but I also just feel like you're spending all of this money every time you want to wash things. So I just put the washing machine in the washing machine. I put the material in the washing machine on a wool cycle with wool detergent. And I remember my mum telling me to wash all your material before you cut it out, because then if it does its shrinking, it's probably not going to shrink again. It shrinks initially.
That sounds really clever. That was just a tip.
Yes.
So what's the deal here?
Don't do anything that I do
Don't
without...
listen to Andrea.
Yes, check up another channel.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I did, which I was very proud of myself, is I lined it, even though the pattern didn't say so. So as a sewer, I'm very good at following patterns, but I'm not good enough to be able to improvise with my sewing. But I thought, why not? Give it a go. I'm getting game. So I lined the skirt as well. So what I did... You can see the yoke of the skirt here. Well, that's got two pieces of material. There's the outside, which you see, and then the inside. And the outside piece of material is also got an ironing on interface. So, that makes the material just a little bit stiffer. And I just simply replaced the inside part of the material, which should have also been in this material, with lining fabric. And I'm going to be game and show you a picture of the inside of my skirt. So don't criticise too much. I am an amateur. It'll look pretty amateurish to those of you who are good sewers. So I don't know if that was a good idea or not, because maybe you need the extra stiffness. We'll have to see over time. And obviously lining material isn't as thick as woolen material. And I also just cut out another shape of the bottom part and sewed that in. So this is what it looks like. It's got a little zip at the back. I didn't have quite enough material to put a good solid hem on it, and I imagine that you need maybe a good inch on a solid woolen fabric, just so that it hangs nicely. I only had a centimetre and a half, so I thought I'd get some nice green lace, and I'll show you here, which I think looks really pretty. I can vaguely remember my mum doing hemming of garments with lace. And so that's where the idea came from. So there we go. There's my skirt, finished object. Sewing goes indecently fast.
Indecently fast?
Indecently fast.
You did this project over about 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, little bits and time whenever I could.
Yeah, it wasn't solid days.
I am definitely a knitter at heart, not a sewer. Knitting is relaxing. No matter how difficult the pattern is, it's basically relaxing. But sewing, you haven't found that yet.
I haven't always had that experience. Sometimes it sounds like it's not so relaxing for you too, Darls.
Yeah, you did. When I first met you, you said to me you'd never heard me swear until I started to knit or sew.
We've been married for a long time now.
I don't enjoy the process that much. Cutting out material is a bit of a drag. It's not really comfortable. You're always trying to... And my scissors, because people use my scissors for other things, and they're blunt when I get to use them. That is so frustrating.
Tell me, who uses the scissors for cutting things in the garden?
Yeah, that's the kitchen scissors, not my sewing scissors.
Yeah, they're not your scissors, which I never touch at all.
You do.
I don't. I don't. Kitchen
under
scissors.
Death threats.
They're chopping down small trees for these scissors. That's fine.
Anyway, you all can imagine what it's like to cut out material with blunt scissors. It's a few swear words come out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have got some material. I'm going to make myself a blouse to go with it. There's the picture of the blouse. You probably don't see much, but it's kind of a pretty blouse with a retro little tie at the neck. And I bought some very interesting material. I don't know really what you'd call this material, because it could be viscose.
Which I think is probably viscose in English.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's the German. But it's got a stretch, so it stretches this direction, but not this direction. It's not satin. It's But it's very lovely and shiny, and the colour is quite unique. You could describe it as equal parts of grey, green and brown.
Yeah.
If I stand up again quickly,
Picturing.
you can see that it goes very nicely with my skirt. So with a little bit of luck, next episode 24, I'll be sitting here wearing it.
Yep.
Because, as I said, sewing is indecently fast.
Indecently fast. Dolls, just to get back to knitting for a moment, this is a knitting podcast.
It is.
Have you ever been inspired to line anything that you've knitted? Or can you imagine when you would do that?
I don't know. Lining is not a flexible, elastic
It's not
fabric.
stretchy, yeah.
And jumpers are. The other thing, which is interesting, and you're going to hear about with Deb Robson, she talks about wool fibres and the itch factor. But for me, I'm pretty tolerant with itch factor. In fact, I really love an itchy wool. I love to have wools that I can go out and garden in, or go out and be in the country in, or hike in, or do lots of rough work, and know that you can take them off and chuck them on the ground. You can go horse riding in them. Nothing's going to happen to them.
Chuck them on the ground?
Yeah.
I'm never making you a jumper, doll, I can tell you that.
But also it's nice to have fine things that you get dressed up and look really gorgeous in.
And you don't chuck
evenings.
on the ground.
So wool is brilliant that way. You can have all sorts, and that's exciting, and you're going to hear about that soon with Deborah Robson.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Alix. I'm a knitter from Northumberland, which is England's most northerly county. I've been able to knit for about 50 years. I was taught by my mother and my grandmother when I was around about 5. They taught me how to cast on, how to cast off. They taught me the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and I remember my mother pulled out an old sweater, so I had lots of yarn which I could play with, and I made a sweater for my teddy bear, and that actually was the beginning of a lifetime of knitting garments. I don't think I'd made a hat or a scarf until about 4 years ago. I knitted all the way through my teens and all the way through my early 20s, when there was really not a huge amount of choice in terms of yarn or patterns. I had a school friend who found a job at a new, very fashionable yarn store, and they stocked Fildar, and together we spent a lot of time planning what we were going to make out of these really exciting Fildar books. I stopped knitting for about 25 years, and when I picked up my needles again, lots of things had changed. I found Ravelry, which was both inspiring and intimidating in equal measure. I'm very much a project knitter, a garment knitter. I'm not a process knitter, but it became obvious that there were some processes that I would need to learn, particularly if I wanted to make the kind of garments that I now wanted to make. I found the Craftsy platform, and I did Mary Jane Mucklestone's Fair Isle Vest course, which was a real eye-opener for me, because Mary Jane has a very casual style to knitting, which was actually really very much how I felt about my own knitting, but I felt that I ought not to feel casual about it. I felt that I ought to feel very particular about it. And once I got over the fact that things did not have to be perfect, and that I could make my own choices and my own decisions, I found that I was able to largely ignore patterns because they did not do what I wanted them to do, and I learned how to create things for myself. Knitting's now a very big part of my life. I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about knitting. I open my wardrobe and I think about knitting. I open my laptop and the homepage is set to Ravelry, and I then spend a lot of time talking about knitting with new friends that I've made on Ravelry. I enjoy it very much. This is the very first garment that I made for myself With the help of Mary Jane Mucklestone and Elizabeth Zimmerman, I sorted out my Fair Isle motifs and I sorted out all of my sizing. I spent a long time positioning the colours in the Fair Isle in the yoke, and off I went. What actually happened was I spent so much time thinking about the colours on the yoke, I had overlooked the fact that the colour of the body was really awful. It was a dull yellow and it really didn't look nice at all. I decided that what I would do is use this lovely colour work as a swatch and choose a different colour and reknit the whole cardigan all over again. I took this with me to a yarn festival to try and pick out a colour that I would like for the rest of the sweater. And one of the stall holders was talking to me about it and was really very strongly encouraging me not to throw this lovely work away, but to cut off the bottom and knit down from the yoke in my new colour. And I thought, well, how hard can it be? And it turned out that it wasn't that hard at all. So I did it. I chose the wrong colour again. I chose a bright yellow and that was horrible as well. So this is third time lucky. I made this cardigan to wear at Woolfest. Woolfest takes place in June. So if you want to wear some of your knitting, you really need to think about making something light. I had already ordered yarn to go with the colours in this dress. And I'd also made a swatch of some little yachts with white sails to sail along the blue. But I didn't like it and decided it was a bit too childish for me, really. So I actually slotted in the pattern from Susan Crawford's Bowland cardigan. This cardigan ended up being a double Susan Crawford mashup because I used the lace pattern from the sleeves of her Nancy sweater. I've become quite confident with picked up sleeves lately by using the top-down book, which has loads of really useful fit information in it. I made a rather nice vintage style slip over for a friend to his specification, and it worked out really rather well. It was quite sad to give it away. I decided that I'd try and have a go at making something similar for myself. I found it quite difficult to step away from the design that I'd already done, and I couldn't possibly make something that was exactly the same as his, as there was a high chance that we would both be out together in the same place. I came to a sort of creative thud and struggled a bit really to come up with some new ideas. And then I decided while flicking through my pattern books one day that the colour work from Marie Wallin's Fleur sweater would fit very nicely with the colours that I had and the colours that I wanted to use. The stitch counts were very similar and I just slotted it in. When I put the project up on Ravelry, I actually took the time to tag the projects properly and I ended up on the front page of Ravelry, which I was very pleased about. This cardigan was a great fun project. Some while ago, Kate Davies had designed for herself a stranded, seamless sweater just to see how it would work for her. Some of us in Ravelry found it and decided that we would like to have a try to see how it would work for us. And so, with Kate's permission and Kate's encouragement, off we went. I used scraps of yarn that I had because I wasn't really certain how well it would turn out. And that was wise because it didn't really turn out terribly well at all. The sleeves were rather too long. The neckline is rather too wide. The overall length of the cardigan for me is also rather too long. So I've only worn it once, but I have learned a huge amount from it. I made this sweater for a Cal in the Jen Arnold Culliford knitwear group on Ravelry called Picture This, where the idea was that you created something that was inspired by a picture. I've really liked Eskimo Genses for a while, and most of them seem to be based on a light or a white ground. So when I saw a photograph of Kate Winslet wearing a rather nice sweater that had a very dark ground, I snapped it and tucked it away. So when this car came along, this seemed to be a great opportunity for me to actually do something with that photograph. I designed the sweater using charts that I had made, which I prepared in advance up to about here, which was where the decreasing would have needed to start. I couldn't really get my head around planning this in advance, so I decided that what I would do was knit and cross the decreasing bridge when I came to it. It was quite straightforward to plan the decreases in once I was knitting, because all of the points of these zigzags on the sweater needed to line up, so it was quite straightforward to put the decreases in between those zigzags. I'll show you the back. I would normally do short rows around about here on a yoked sweater to tip the neck forward and get a good fit, but this colour work started before the body and the sleeves were joined, so I couldn't do the short rows there. So I incorporated the short rows into the colour work at the back neck, and I rather liked the way that turned out. Overall, this is one of the nicest things that I've made. I'm really pleased with it.
Welcome back. Isn't Alix impressive? I have to say, what a stylish woman she is.
Yeah.
You've got to go over and check her Ravelry page out. I love the way she puts, I think she's a sewer as well, and I love the way she puts her clothes together and does her styling. She's got very similar hair colour and skin tone to me, so I think the colours that she picks for herself, I'm completely drawn to. I love all of her garments and wish I had them in my closet.
So you would steal her wardrobe.
I would steal her wardrobe.
That's an interesting concept. How
Totally.
How often do people get broken into
and have their woolen stolen?
Clothing stolen? Yeah.
But what's interesting, this is just a coincidence, but when you see the interview in today's episode, I'm wearing a cardigan by Alice Starmore called Meadow Sweet. That's the design, and I've knitted up in the original colours. Well, on the back wall, hanging behind Alix when she was talking, she has got a version of the Meadow Sweet. So she's got the pattern on her body, but she's left the sleeves plain, and she's done it in a dark colourway, which looks stunning. And also on her Ravelry page, she's got another Meadow Sweet colour combination where she's used reds and greens, very autumn colours. So I'd love to pinch them all.
Yeah.
She better, if I ever met her and went to her house, she would be in danger. But I say, could I just use your bathroom?
Yeah, come back and you're walking out there. Wearing six
So
jumpers.
thank you so much for your contribution, Alix. It was I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah,
Yep.
Great knitter, very inspiring.
Yep. Oh, I'm just on one stitch. Get off.
Last stitch. Okay, so we're up to Andrew. I had thought that you might have broken your own record and finished the pair of socks.
I had another finished object.
Yeah.
Another finished project. No, I haven't. But look, they're really coming along well. I've got probably about 5 more rows, and then I'll start doing the decreases for the toes. I have to say, I mentioned in the last episode that
this is the first sock.
There's the sock. That's my last project. This is my current project. I mentioned in the last episode that the next pair of socks I would include a bit of cable in it, and people have reacted to that very strongly and come up with some really beautiful suggestions. You can look on the group there or the comments on the last episode. We need to bring things back into perspective here. Right? I'm very flattered by the confidence that everyone has in my abilities, but I was thinking of something quite minor. Just to give you an idea of the level of my skills right now, I was doing the gusset here, right? And this is a heel flap and gusset. And
Hold it this way.
Sorry, hold it so people can see. I have to say, I do this really well, right? Really, look at that curve there. It's really
beautiful.
good, yeah? But
if you remember to do the...
this involves, on one row, I have to do a bit of decreasing here and there, and I'm really good at getting it at the right spot. And then on the other row, I just knit round. Okay, so it's decrease row and then a knit row. And
which most people will know. There's a lot of good sock
okay, if you've ever knitted a sock, you would know this, yeah. It does take an enormous amount of concentration for me to get round the knit row without doing any decreases.
It's become automatic.
Yeah, well, yeah, and just to know where I am. So I did get that under control in the end. But some of these sock patterns with the cables, they're a little bit ambitious for me at the moment, but maybe we'll get there one day.
But, and I have to be very careful with saying no to Andrew. I got a little bit of knuckle rapping.
What was it? Yeah, controlling.
Yes, that I should just let you have your artistic freedom.
Yeah. I haven't mentioned this to you, but I have got a plan for my own sock design.
Oh, right.
But that's top secret at this stage.
So why are you telling us?
I'm just starting to build the expectation.
Okay. So, Andrew, why don't you show your new project?
Yep. Okay, so this is what's coming up. This wool is rosy green wool from Munich, so here in Germany, kind of local. It's produced in the UK, but still. It is organic merino. It's called Cheeky Merino Joy. Cheeky Merino Joy is the name of the base. You picked out the colours.
Yeah.
This is actually going to be a project for my mum. So I'm going to knit a shawl, and it's the Drachenfels shawl by Melanie Berg.
Melanie Berg, who
again German.
Most
German.
people will know she does amazing shawl designs, and she lives, I think, in Bonn or Cologne, but not far from us.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of pass through Cologne fairly often. But you picked out the colours. This is going to be for my mum, so you picked out the colours to suit her. They're sort of her tones, and it's nothing too loud because it's got to be something that she likes. And yeah, it's going to be this shawl. I think it's quite an easy knit. That's what I'm trusting. You selected it, but I'm trusting that it is relatively easy because
it's garter stitch with some slip stitches, which is nice. It's something new for you, but it's still a lot of easy knitting because you're often sitting down late at night.
Yeah. It's
with a fried
end of the
brain.
day. That's right. End of the day knitting. It's going to be for my mum. Mum's in Melbourne. Melbourne doesn't get really cold like it does here in Germany or in some of the places, Maine, what we see there with the snow. It's not like that, of course, but it is cool, and I think she'll really enjoy having a shawl. My mum is in a nursing home. She's a bit older. She's in her 80s. So
Is she 85 now?
She's 85, yeah.
Yeah.
Mum does have Alzheimer's, so she has trouble keeping things in line and knowing what's going on. So I do suspect that she won't really understand that I've made this. I don't think she really knows that I can knit.
She would find it hilarious.
Yeah, I think she'd find it really funny. I think she'd find it cool. But that's okay. She'll enjoy it, I think. And
it's going to be a great, lovely, warm, cozy scarf that she can put around her shoulders when she goes out into the garden, or if she's sitting watching telly or something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And my sister is very nearby, so I'm sure she'll
tell
always
her 5
remind
or 6
her.
times.
Yeah. Andrew made this, and then So that's really cool. Her birthday is in May, late May.
The pressure's
so
on,
that's a target. I think there's quite a few stitches in this thing, but we'll see how we go. We might do some calculations and
But I think that'll be a fun project, and
I'm looking forward to it. The wool looks beautiful, and I think it's going to come up really nicely.
Yeah. We've picked 2 winners for the Fair Isle accessory, Carl, which is super exciting. There were 86 entries. Lots of great projects, and really the gifts or the prizes that you've won is the fact that you've got these lovely objects now and the skills that you've learned through making yourself do it, because there was quite a lot of people who were doing Fair Isle Stranded for the first time. So congratulations to all of you. That's really, really great.
That's really cool. Think of all these things out there that people are enjoying.
Yeah. So one of the prizes, we were going to donate a book. This is by Knit Sonic, Felicity Ford. It's Stranded Colourworks Sourcebook, where it really teaches people how to take their favourite objects in everyday life and translate that into your knitting. And accessory knitting is a great place to start to put this in practice. And Felicity has gone through and done amazing, very simple structures to help you get an idea, to translate it on paper, and then how to play with it and work it out so that you can end up having it on your gloves, on your jumper, on your hat. It's a gorgeous book. So the winner for this is Rachel, and that was Achtung Kitten. And we might even put a picture of the design here. So congratulations, Rachel.
Yeah.
That's great. So you're going to have a lot of fun with this book. Get in contact with me through personal, message me through Ravelry. Felicity has just got married and I think is on her honeymoon. So we might have to wait till she comes back.
No, I don't think so. Oh.
Before, yes, I think we do.
Okay.
Before I can get her to send one out to you. But give me your details first and we'll get on to that. The second prize was from Über den Traum, where you can go over and you can pick a little toolkit, and you can pick the size needles that you want and some other stitch markers and gauge instruments and a whole lot of little things that you can put into that. So that's also a great page. The details for both of these prizes were on our Ravelry finished objects thread. And the winner for that is Ruth. And her Ravelry name is U138741. And Ruth is from Seattle, Washington. So well done, Ruth, and well done, Rachel.
Yep.
That's super exciting. We did extend the cabled garment cale to the end of February, which is great because every day there's a new cabled garment just coming in. They look fantastic.
Yeah.
So the prize for the cabled garment cale is going to be a copy of the Knitted Cabled Sourcebook by Noah Gone. It's a fantastic cabling book. There's some good designs in there, but there's just a whole lot of samples of great patterns that you can incorporate into your next garment. So I'm really looking forward to being able to donate that to the winner of the cabled garment cale.
Yep.
Which will be at the end of February. And you've got something to say.
Yeah, the other thing we want to mention there is that we are doing our selfie collage for the cable garment cale. I think it's really good to do it for the garments because it's a really big project, so we want to celebrate it really well. The instructions are on the thread, on the finished objects thread on Ravelry, but very briefly, we're after a 20-second video. We put it together in a little collage. You introduce yourself, talk about your garment, what pattern it is, what yarn it is, where you are, that sort of thing. You can have a look at the last one that we did of this in episode 18. We had our first garment cale.
Yeah.
Was one, and also the Fair Isle garment cale. So both of them are in that episode.
So if you're a bit nervous about doing it, go and check it out. I think in episode 18, around 46 minutes, you can see how people, what people have done, and I'm sure you'll think, I can do that too.
Yeah, it's cool. It's fun. So get in. It's a good place to.
But it has to be only 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
So you say your name, you say this is my jumper, the name of the pattern, the name of the yarn, what you loved about it or what you hated about it.
And smile.
And smile.
That's the other really important thing.
Speak loudly. And no aeroplane noises.
Yep.
From the Archives is also featuring today, and I'm going to show you what I'm wearing. This was the very first Alice Starmore garment that I knitted myself. Way back in 2002, I was in New York for some singing lessons and I walked into a little yarn store. I can't remember where it was. It was upstairs, a gorgeous one.
Upstairs in New York.
Upstairs in New York.
I've heard that somewhere.
I came across the original Tudor Roses book and I could not believe that there could be so many beautiful knitted patterns available to knit. I was completely blown away, like radically. So I bought some Norwegian baby wool because that was the only wool that I could find in that gauge. At the time, Alice Starmore didn't have her Hebridean yarn, and these patterns were, I think, made for her old yarn range, but I don't think, Scottish Campion, but I don't think the shop was stocking them. Here's a picture of it. And I thought it looked so beautiful in the cream. I wanted to do mine in the cream as well. And so I found I found my original swatch. This is from years ago. So here it is. It's this beautiful Norwegian baby wool. So it was my very first Alice Starmore garment. At the time, I thought it was incredibly difficult and didn't think I was ever going to knit anything so difficult again in my life, mainly because it was the finest gauge I'd ever knitted. And then also I was knitting things that I knitted short rows for the first time in my life, but I didn't know they were short rows till later. Then I thought, I've done that in Alice Starmore. I'm going to stand up. The way she has shaped the bottom here, that's done with short rows. In the last episode, I talked about waist shaping, and I said you can put your waist shaping at the front as well as your sides. Well, Alice has done the waist shaping both at the front, in front darts and back darts, and at the sides. I'll show you that. It's just a whole lot of beautiful details. You can see around the neck, around here, and on the hem. You've got this lovely pearl stitches on a stockinette background in this medieval kind of pattern. And then you've got the rose design here because her Elizabeth I's emblem was a rose, and moss stitch, and just a very delicate cable coming all the way down. It is such a beautiful design, I think. The first time I wore it, I knitted it and I wore it to a party. Do you remember?
Yes, I remember.
And I dunked my sleeve in some coffee. You cannot believe this. It was somewhere there's a little coffee stain because I could never get it out. But it happened on the first time. Here it is. The first time that I wore it. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Anyway, how crazy. The sleeves are lovely, but if I was knitting this again, they're just impractical. You know, it's a beautiful, if you have a gorgeous skirt, you could wear it to a wedding. But, you know, I like to wear my clothes more often than that.
Yeah, as it is, it's not really an everyday sort of garment.
No, so I would wear it. I would knit it again, but just take some of I like the tunic kind of sleeve, but I would take some of the bulk out and just make it a little bit more narrow. So this is the Alice Starmore Elizabeth I. That was my entry into the world of Alice Starmore.
Did you have to rip back any of that? Do you remember?
No, I didn't. But I can remember thinking it was incredibly difficult, and I thought I would never. It was the most easiest one in this book, and I thought, could you imagine being a master knitter and being able to knit this? Do you remember me saying that?
No, I can't remember that exactly, but I can remember at the time it was pretty exciting that you'd knitted this thing.
Yeah, it was very exciting. Back then, I would only knit once or twice a year. Every time we went on holidays, I would go to and get a pattern and some wool and knit a jumper, but I wasn't knitting daily.
Yeah. So we're now up to our interview with Deb Robson. Deb Robson is a really interesting person, I think. She's completely committed to the whole fibre world, the sheep breeds, very passionate about preserving different sheep breeds. I think this is a really interesting talk for people at all stages of the fibre process. So if you're particularly interested in the individual sheep breeds or spinning, selecting yarns, and also if you're a knitter, understanding what yarns you can use for different projects, what's most suitable and what will serve you well.
Yeah.
Deb's got a great energy. I think she's a really great person to be around. So it should be an interesting interview for everyone. Deborah does have a free Craftsy course available called Know Your Wool. You can join up at Craftsy and have a look at that. It gives you an introduction to the same sort of material that she covers in the Fiber Sourcebook.
Yeah, and she also does a couple of retreats a year for spinners, one in spring and one in autumn. They're called Explore 4 Fibre Retreats. So if you're a spinner of all levels, as long as you can spin a continuous thread and do a 2-ply, but it's also good for advanced spinners, then these are really great retreats. And she goes into a lot more detail than what her book is like the starting point, and she goes into a lot of detail about sourcing fibre and spinning it and all the rest of it. I'm not a spinner, so I can't go there. But it sounds like a lot of fun, and she's certainly very knowledgeable.
Yep. And Deb is our guest on our next Fruity Knitting Live event. So she'll be joining us with our Shetland patrons, and we'll have a live session, be able to ask questions directly and talk to her. So that's something for our Shetland patrons to look forward to. We have had a lot of people sign up recently to become patrons and support the show. Thank you very much for that. It is really helping us keep the show going, particularly supporting the work that Andrea does. It's a lot of work to get this all together with guests and the whole lot of it. So thank you again.
Yes.
The Patreon page is there. You can find a link either below here on the YouTube site, or if you go to fruityknitting.com, you'll find it. If it's something that you might be interested in, then please take a look. If you have any questions, we've got a special thread on the Ravelry page, so you can put any questions and we'll get back to you there. So.
Yes. So thanks again for spending your time with us. I'm feeling a little bit groggy. It's been a kind of a relaxed feeling sitting on the couch this time. So have a great 2 weeks, and we look forward to speaking to you again in 2 weeks' time.
Yep. Thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next program.
Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. I have an amazing guest with me today that you're really going to enjoy listening to, and that's Deborah Robson. Deborah describes herself as a fibre generalist who specialises in spinning, knitting and weaving. She was editor at Interweave Press for 14 years and editor-in-chief of Spin-Off, which is a magazine for spinners, for 12 years. Deborah experienced a moment of awakening when she realised that the list of rare sheep breeds included the animals who grew some of her favourite spinning fibres. So when she discovered that these breeds were at risk of extinction, Deborah made it a permanent quest to learn more about and raise other fibre artists' awareness of these rare sheep breeds. Deborah worked together with the livestock expert Carol Acarius for 4 years, researching, spinning and writing about more than 200 fibres. The amazing accumulation of this knowledge became the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook, more than 200 fibres from animal to spun yarn. Deborah, it's such a privilege to have you on the show with us today, so a very warm welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast.
Thank you, Andrea. It's really fun to be here. I love talking about wool. I love talking about natural fibers, so we can have a good time.
Yeah. So you have said, actually, that you're in love with natural fibers. Let's start with wool. What is so magical about wool? Why does it hold endless fascination for you?
Wool is almost magical in its physical and chemical properties, and that sounds a little bit technical, but what I mean is it works in our lives so well. It's a wonder fiber. There are things we understand about it and things we don't know. And I love what we know, and I love that there's still mystery involved. It is, okay, so let's start with what we know. Some of the things we know are that it initially sheds water. In other words, there's a water resistance quality to it. But when you expose it to more water, it absorbs that water inside the fiber. So it can roughly absorb 30% of its weight before it feels wet. Now, as it's doing that, there's an actual chemical reaction going on that generates heat. So, as you're out in your wool sweater, getting wet in a storm, you may not get as wet as you think, as fast as you might, and the wool will keep you warm in the process of taking in that water. Releasing the water, once it also lets it go, also generates heat. So, there's this amazing chemical reaction going on that makes it function in our lives in ways that no other fiber does. It is self-extinguishing, self-extinguishing, hard word to say, in fire. It requires 20% more oxygen to burn than most things that we try to burn. So it self-extinguishes because there's not that much oxygen in the atmosphere. There's a really cool video on YouTube that you can find showing the difference between a wool mattress and a synthetic mattress when they catch on fire. And basically, the synthetic mattress, you're dead. The wool mattress, you make it out alive. It becomes a good insulating material as well. Because of that, it's not used a lot for insulation. It's used some, but it hasn't been vetted through the various building codes and so forth. But it should be because it has these amazing natural qualities. It is antimicrobial, so it tends to keep your clothing healthy. It does not hold odors. So if you are traveling and you have a wardrobe of wool clothing, you won't need to wash it as often. I actually travel with very lightweight wool clothing, actually like this icebreaker thing that I'm wearing. Wash it out in the sink at night. It's dry in the morning. It's fantastic to travel in. You don't think about this in terms of wool. People think of it as a high care fiber, and it's not at all. You just need to know what to do. It's really easy. So it resists odors, it resists mildews, it resists stains, it tends to resist wrinkling. It's insulating. So when we put it on our bodies, it insulates us from the cold. Interestingly enough, you can also wear it in hot weather, and it is very helpful. You want a lightweight wool, of course, in hot weather, but it becomes a really practical garment for that because of the way it handles moisture. It will take the moisture out. We think that's a function of modern synthetic fibers, but it's not. Wool does that. The other thing about insulation is I have a hot water bottle here, and it's in a repurposed thrift store wool sweater cozy. And I put this in my bed at night, and guess what? It's still warm in the morning. It's just wonderful. And that's a wool thing. It regains its shape. And there's the best we've been able to do in the lab to create something like wool is acrylic. And I will have a photo that, Andrea, you can put on the screen here that shows acrylic socks and wool socks. And they have had about the same wear. They have both been machine washed and dried. And the acrylic socks have lost their shape, fuzzed out funny, weird pills, and just they look awful. And the wool socks look like they just came off my knitting needles. So we can't replicate this stuff. It's magical. It's also sustainable. It's a renewable resource. Sheep grow more every year. Nobody is harmed in the process of growing and using wool. And we can come back to that later because there's so many misconceptions about shepherding.
Yeah.
It is also extremely durable. I have a couple of sweaters here that I want to show you. This one I made about 25 years ago, and I have been wearing it daily for 3 seasons out of every year for that amount of time. I have mended 2 spots on it. It's a Gotland fiber, which is a nice kind of slinky fiber. I put this on every morning, and I wear it around the house until I'm ready to get dressed. Put it on over my pajamas. It's also presentable in public, but basically I just love it so much that I save it for myself. But I do wear it daily. This yarn, which is also a hand spun, is on its second sweater. I made a sweater out of it years ago, probably in the 1970s, and then decided that I wanted to change the style. So I ripped the yarn out and I got it wet and reset the twist and made a new sweater out of it. Now I did have to add some yarn, but it's on its second sweater in probably 45 years. So wool just keeps going. It just keeps trucking. So that's part of why I love it. It's a amazingly low environmental footprint, both in the manufacturing, especially if you do your own, but also compared to synthetic fibers. Very low footprint. It also biodegrades. Now, obviously, my sweaters are still going, and they probably would keep going as long as somebody was wearing them and taking care of them. But at the point where its useful life is finished, it will biodegrade. So all of that, it's just amazing stuff.
It sure is. Okay, so the Fruity Knitting channel is mainly a knitting channel, but a lot of the viewers do other fibre crafts as well, including spinning. But if we just stick with knitters, what do you think knitters can learn from having a deeper knowledge of sheep breeds and the fibres? And why do you think it's actually really important for knitters to at least have an awareness of this information?
There are two ways to go at answering that question. And one of them involves proficiency and comfort and joy in our craft. And I say that as a knitter. I also weave, I crochet, I do all sorts of things with yarn. But mostly I knit because it's such a portable craft. I take it with me everywhere. So as crafters, and we'll come back to that a little bit when we talk about specific breeds, as crafters, it's very good to know about breeds because it's kind of hidden information. You can find it if you're looking for it. But mostly we think of wool as a generic product that is all the same, and it's way so not. That's really important to understand. And the other reason is to understand how our craft interfaces with other parts of the world in our environment and what we can do with our choices about which wools we put on our needles for which projects. Those have very wide-ranging impacts on the world, and we may not be aware of that. Each purchase of a fiber supports the channel that produces that fiber. So if we choose to buy wool from an endangered breed to knit a sweater, we may end up with a better sweater than if we had just gone generic, although there's nothing wrong with generic wool, and I use a lot of it. But we may also have put enough money in a mill's and a shepherd's pocket to keep them raising that breed. So that's really important in terms of genetic conservation, which again we'll touch on later. So we can be an economic force for good, one ball of yarn or one fleece at a time, if we know what we're doing. And the other piece is that can bring a whole lot more joy into what we're actually creating. So I've got a lot of examples of specific fleeces and specific applications that we can talk about this.
Yes, exactly, because I really see the value in being able to pick a fibre that's really going to suit the product that I'm making. So yeah, show us some fibres and things, and maybe talk about their characteristics and what they're really well suited for.
I'm going to start with 3 really basic types of wools, and there are many, many other kinds, because one of the things about wool is there are hundreds of kinds. And each comes from a sheep that has been fit to a particular niche in the environment, but we have access to all of them. So I'm going to start with a fine wool. And this is Cormo. And when we look at wool, we start thinking about staple length, and that's the length of the fiber that grew on the sheep. This is the skin end. This is where it grew out. This is the tip end. And you can always find the tip because it's a little bit weathered and often a little bit pointed. So a lock of wool is like this, and I take the tip and I pull it to get that. We have a staple length here of roughly 3 inches or maybe 7.5 centimeters. And we have crimp. That's another thing we're going to look at in wool, which is this waviness, and you almost can't see it in this because it's quite fine. If you were here with me, I could show you, but you're going to see it on another lock that I pull. You'll see it really clearly. Crimp is the wave in the wool, and it gives it elasticity. It's part of what helps it regain its shape. It gives it a cushy feel. Has a lot to do with it. One of the mysteries about wool is how crimp forms. There are lots of theories about how crimp forms, but we don't really know. It's in the growth process. It's built into the wool. It's actually part of the physical structure. The only way you can get it out is by some patented chemical processes that produce Optum, which is something that came out of Australian experimentations with wool. Optum has many of the qualities of wool. It is wool, but it has lost some of the other qualities like the elasticity. So we have crimp and we have staple length. We also have something called micron count. And a fine micron count is a very fine fiber, and these fibers are really, really, really delicate. These are probably about 20 microns, more or less. Roughly, 15 is incredibly fine. 15 is so fine you mostly don't see it. 18 to 21 microns, 22, 23 is a very soft fiber. Anything 18 and under is where cashmere comes in. So that gives you a kind of a reference point. The 20s, we're going to go up to the 20s. So this is probably a 21. It's a very soft fiber. It is not especially durable. It's going to be great for next to the skin. It's a camisole. Fantastic. Hats. I have here a pair of Rambouillet, which is a fine wool, fingerless mitts. The yarn is from Sheep Spot in Canada. It is Rambouillet, which is a merino cousin. Most people have heard of merino. That's a place you can start understanding wools. And this is not a fiber that I would use for something that I want for hardware. So I'm not going to go out and work with the wood pile or something like that with this. But it's fantastic for when I'm at my computer in a coffee shop that's cool or something like that because it's really soft and cozy. So Sheep Spot, Rambouillet, perfect for something that doesn't require a lot of durability, but you want warmth and you want softness.
Just a quick question. When people say the itch factor, can you pretty well equate that with micron count?
Yes,
or is
and
there
no.
Something else involved there as well?
There are two things involved there. One is for industry, it's all about micron count. And a fiber that has a micron count where almost all of the fibers are at 30 microns or below is, for most people, going to be itch-free. Okay, so that's industry.
Mm-hmm.
As we work with hand spinning and choosing our own fibers, there's another factor involved that it took me a long time to figure out, and that's the flexibility of the fiber itself. So what itches is the tips. And if they are coarse, high micron count, and if they are inflexible, then that's what creates the itch against our skin.
Okay.
So what's weird is that some very, very fine fibers, I am looking at you, New Zealand possum, the tips of those fibers can be 5 microns. That is smaller than a red blood cell. Blow your mind right there, right? Okay?
Yeah.
But some people find that those tips are irritating. Some people don't at all. It's a really interesting fiber because it is that fine, but it will not felt. So you can put it in luxury garments that end up being machine washed and or get a lot of wear. So there's a lot of pressure with heat and moisture. It won't felt. So it's really great that way. But some people find that those tips are irritating. So that's where the flexibility comes in. Those tips are not flexible.
Okay.
And this is one of my favorite fibers. This is Border Leicester. Look at that crimp. You see those waves in there? Again, we've got a huge staple length here. We've got probably 6 inches or maybe 15 centimeters. And this is probably in the low 30s in micron count. Now, there's something you can do to compensate for a higher micron count or potential itchiness. If you want to wear this in something that, say, will be next to your wrist, which is somewhat sensitive or something, spin it worsted or buy a worsted spun yarn, because those tips sticking out are what create the itch factor. And if you spin worsted, which means that the fibers are all parallel, then the tips don't have as much opportunity to stick out.
Okay.
Isn't that cool?
That's great information. So you need to know the name of the sheep breed and then how it's spun. And that can determine whether its level of itch factor alone.
Yes, absolutely. When we say a coarse wool, like the Border Leicester, often we're going to say it's not good for next to skin, when in fact there are parts of your body that are not as sensitive so that you can use it. I have a sweater here I made this sweater. It's a machine spun from Juniper Moon Farm. And I wore this the first time helping with shearing a flock of Shetland sheep. And it works. It's a workhorse. It just is. It's going to be durable for eternity, practically.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't worry about this sweater. I don't worry about this sweater. By the way, if you want to check a fiber, do a little swatch. Put it inside your sweater or something so it holds next to your wrist, or put it inside a camisole or something so that it's next to sensitive skin. Also, the back of the neck is an important place to test. If it doesn't bother you with that test, you'll be okay with it. This is just a little bit of a shawl that I can wear around my neck. The fiber is Clun Forest. It's a medium wool. The breed came from the border between England and Wales, and it's in the U.S. It's around. It's a wonderful, wonderful sheep. And this is good insulation. It takes dye well. Wool does take dye well. You'll find that the strong wools, the luster wools, have a real gleam to them. And something like a Rambouillet or a fine wool has kind of a more matte surface, so you can watch that happening. This is, it's another sheep spot. This is Clun Forest, hand-dyed from sheep spot in Canada. This is a Suffolk sweater. Suffolk is primarily a meat breed. Its wool is usually composted, burned, or thrown out. I know of barn attics that are full of it. The reason is that in the commercial market, it's not valuable. The sheep have black faces and black legs, and those little black hairs get into the fleece, which means that if it's going through an industrial process, there's a potential for a black fiber to create a flaw in the finished yarn or finished yardage. This is the most amazing wool because it won't felt. We think of wool as always felting. There is a group of wools that are so reluctant to felt that effectively they don't. This sweater has been machine washed and dried. I did 2 swatches, same size, same needles, threw one in the machine washer, threw it through actually hot water, put it through the whole dryer cycle. It came out exactly the same size as the one that I had for the control. This machine washes and dries, and it won't felt. So that happens in some of the mid-range wools. Always test, but you can find this other thing happening. Let's talk about felting for a minute. Felting is something that happens in many wools, and it's another thing that we don't understand. We have a lot of theories about why wool felts, but we don't really know. So I have a whole course I teach on what we think we know about felting. So felting lets me take something like this and throw it into the machine washer and dryer and come up with something like this. And I'm totally addicted to these slippers. So that's why I made myself another pair, because at some point they're going to wear out and I'll be bereft. But felting produces this wonderful stuff. Here's another long wool sweater. The long wools are the coarse ones. They're the shiny ones. This is Coopworth. It came from Hidden Valley Farm. Again, it's woolen spun. It's going to pill a little bit. That's one of the things you get with woolen spinning is those ends sticking out. They also create pills. Trim them off, scissor. Don't pull them because that creates more damage. But it's going to wear forever.
So long wools aren't always worsted spun. Sometimes you can woolen spin them as well.
Correct. The traditional way to do it was worsted. Also, the fine fibers can be spun either woolen or worsted. And for example, if you're using a fine fiber like merino in socks, you want worsted spun, and you also want to work at as tight a gauge as you can go, because otherwise it doesn't have enough durability to stand up in socks. I don't knit myself merino socks because I'm really hard on my socks. I just don't go there. I use the mid-range wools, and they're plenty soft enough, and they last really well for me. But I want to show you here. This is Vera Valimaki's Color Affection, which many people have knitted. I've made 2 of them because I got addicted like everybody else. This is hand-spun blue-faced Leicester. And if you've heard of one breed, you've heard of Merino. If you've heard of two, you've probably heard of blue-faced Leicester. What it has that the long wools have is drape. And you can see that action here. That's very different from the Suffolk sweater that I had up a minute ago, which has puff more than drape. So this is an absolutely exquisite fiber for something that you want to feel elegant in.
So what's causing the drape? What about the long wool is causing a drape?
It's long fibers. It's the way the crimp is acting within that yarn. Now you can overcome the drape a bit by spinning a coarse long wool thick, which is actually a great thing to do if you want to make a rug or a bag or a pillow, seat cushion. But if you spin it fine enough that there's room for the fiber to actually move, and it's got that length and it's got that open crimp, it's going to drape. I want to talk about some fleeces that we don't think of as being really valuable. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that have especially the three mixes of fibers. A sheep can grow three different types of fiber. It can grow wool, which is what we've seen in the locks I've already shown you. It can grow hair, which is a longer fiber, and you see this in the Icelandics. You see it in some Shetlands. You see it in some Hebrideans. There are a number of breeds that have wool and hair. They all have wool. Some of them have wool and hair. Some of them have wool, hair, and kemp. Kemp is very short, very brittle. There's a rumor that it doesn't take dye. What actually happens is the dye goes inside the fiber, so you can't see it. So it's weird. So kemp is itchy. It has a very high micron count, and it's very stiff and brittle, so it has no flexibility. So what do you do with it? One of the things you can do, I put this on except my headset won't like it, is you can make something like a hat. This is lined. I got this in Wales. It's great for keeping the mist off. This is herdwick. And people will say, what the heck would you do with a herdwick? Now, when we were doing the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook, we were trying to get herdwick fleece to work with, and a shepherd wrote back and said, well, why the heck would you want that? Well, we wanted it, okay? The thing is about herdwick, they don't think the wool is valuable. There are a few people who do. This is a lap robe. It contains wool, hair, and kemp. It is not next to the skin. There's just no way. But it's this very lightweight fabric that is really cozy and, again, durable. It's tweedy, and that's part of what the kemp hair wool mix gives you, is a tweedy effect. I love this, and you can take some of these fibers and dehair them and produce a really nice yarn. It's a lot of extra work. But you can also use them unmixed. Herdwick makes absolutely fantastic, gorgeous, durable, incredible, beautiful carpet. And let me tell you, let me tell you another thing about wool. Wool can remove toxins from the air. Stuff like formaldehyde that shows up in so many building materials. And as we make tighter houses, becomes a bigger issue because we don't get the airflow that used to happen when we had, leaky houses. Wool actually can take those toxins out of the air and bind them. And it can do that for up to 30 years. So if you put wool carpet in your house, you're going to have a healthier environment. It tends to be hypoallergenic as well. The right wool in the right application becomes a source of amazing discovery. And I think it's something that we can all get a lot of pleasure from.
So, Deborah, I've got your Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook here, and I've been reading through it slowly. What audience did you write it for, and how would you like people to use your book?
First, thank you for reading it slowly. It took a very long time to research and write. I wrote it partly mostly because I wanted that book on my shelf. I wanted that information available. So how I would like people to use it is by having it nearby, looking up things they're curious about, or simply opening it up and reading at random and discovering new things about natural fibers from animals.
Okay. Now, we've got time for two more quick questions. And so one question in particular, which I'm really interested to hear your answer for, and that is that humans have been living with sheep and other domesticated animals for thousands of years, and we've kind of developed this symbiotic relationship. And some of your recent research has been focusing on that, and in particular, the example of the Shetland sheep as being a really good example of this relationship that we've had where we're interdependent. So what's so special about the Shetland sheep?
Shetland sheep are emblematic of the entire history of humans and sheep, and they are emblematic of that yet today. So they represent some of the earliest domestication incidences. They were taken on small boats from parts of Central Europe or the Mediterranean up to the British Isles. And think about that. Think about sheep in small boats. I mean, it just blows my mind. They also connect to the contemporary global wool market. And Shetlands have changed through history to adapt to different cultural and economic conditions. And yet different flocks still retain aspects of every piece of that journey. So they are unique in that way. We have everything from carpet wools to the very finest wools coming from different Shetland flocks, depending on where they are, both in the world and in that course of history. So they are unique in that they show the whole story.
Because they also have some still relatively wild characteristics about them too. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. The purebred Shetlands, especially in Shetland, are the ones that can survive on their own on the hills, basically. They're unshepherded for most of the year. The more finely bred or highly bred sheep need to be in close to the people where they can be tended. So Shetlands can take care of themselves and their lambs really well independently. And that's a characteristic of the wild sheep, although it exists in many of the domesticated rare breeds, excuse me.
And also quickly, I read that they developed their own diet by being forced to live on the seashores and eating a lot of seaweed, and that they've kind of grown into that. Is that correct, or what can you say about that?
Okay, you're close on that. Where you're close is that, yes, Shetland sheep do eat seaweed, but the breed that you've heard about that basically is dependent on seaweed is the Northumberland, which comes from Orkney, which is the next group of islands south. So Orkney is between northern Scotland and Shetland, so you keep going up north. Yeah. And the Northumberlandses do depend on seaweed. They have developed a metabolism. It's a copper metabolism that allows them to survive really well on seaweed. And when you take them off that diet, unless you're really careful, actually they'll die. Although within a couple generations, they can adapt to a regular grass diet. So anyway, sheep are amazing in the way they adapt that way. And yes, Shetlands do eat seaweed, but the one you're thinking about is Northumberland.
Okay, so now just for the final question, a lot of your motivation in your research has been to preserve the genetics of rare sheep breeds and to maintain the healthy gene pools for future flocks. Alongside that, you're also very interested in environmental issues and conservation and sustainability. And alongside all of this, we've got a growing vegan movement which is actually objecting to the use of animals for human benefit in any way whatsoever, including the use of wool. So where have you personally had to take a position that, decide to take a position that may look like it's right between conflicting goals or conflicting ideas?
Actually, I live in that space between the conflicting goals and ideas. I have been a vegetarian for about 45 years. I have been effectively vegan for most of the last year for health reasons. And I have friends who, conversely, have needed to change from a vegetarian or vegan diet to eating meat for their health reasons. I deal with shepherds all the time. Meat drives the economics of sheep in our world today. And that has been true for about 300 years. And so I obviously don't criticize what's going on with shepherds. They have to do what they do. You do not become a shepherd because you think it's an easy life or because you want to make money. You do it because you like working with animals.
Yes. And that's clear in James Rebank's book.
Yes,
yeah.
Which is a wonderful book. And if you start talking to shepherds, you understand how actually tough a life it is. It has many rewards in it. But it's hard, and there's a lot of loss involved. So I walk between those worlds, and I am upfront about the fact that I'm vegetarian, but I am upfront also about the fact that I understand where their economics are and that we need to have shepherds in order to have sheep. Now, we have animals in our lives, and when we say we don't want to exploit animals, then take that to its extreme, and it means we have no relationships with animals. And frankly, the relationships that I have had with animals have been some of the best relationships in my life. I love those relationships, and I love being around sheep. The thing that gets me upset is any sort of cruelty and any sort of waste. If an animal's had to give its life, or if we have chosen to take its life, then every scrap of that animal, in my opinion, should be put to good use because it's a way of honoring that life. So some people think that wool is cruel because they don't understand shearing. Some sheep still shed their fleeces, which is a primitive trait, but most of them need to be shorn for their health. Now, you can find some videos of bad shearers doing bad shearing where the sheep are being cut. That's not a good shearer. And a good shearer is going to end up with both the sheep and the shearer undamaged at the end of it, and the wool taken off, which is good for the animal's health. We can use it. The animal starts growing more immediately. I have watched shearers get hurt worse than a sheep ever got hurt. I've known 2 shearers who got pretty seriously hurt. So it is a skill, and we need more good shearers. We're losing them partly because wool has actually dropped in its commodity value with the rise of synthetics, and we need to bring up the value of wool again. We need to use it throughout our lives because it's so amazing. Because it's environmentally sound, because nobody gets hurt in the entire process of growing it and using it. I would love to see flocks of sheep that are just kept for wool. We used to have that historically when people didn't have synthetics. You can have wethers, which are castrated males, growing the best fleece that we can get because they're not under the stress of reproduction, which affects both rams and ewes. So my goal is to bring wool back and pay the shepherds more and get more joy into all of our lives by putting the right wools in the right locations.
And I just think of our attic, which we actually need to insulate. And I'm thinking, I would love to just get some bales of wool from, wool that's going to be put out to compost or wool that's going to be burnt. It should start off as insulation for attics, I think.
Absolutely. And you've increased the fire resistance of your house at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Deborah, it has been so much fun to listen to your knowledge, and we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg of your research and what you've got in there. But a lot of it's in your book, and so I'm really looking forward to finding out more through that. And thank you for all the work and dedication you've done, because it's a really important topic, and people's attention in all areas needs to be drawn to, these qualities of wool, whether you're a knitter, a fibre artist, or just a conservationist. I think it's all very relevant. So thank you for everything that you've done.
Thanks for asking me to be here and for all your excellent questions. They were really fun.
Good. Okay, so we'll say goodbye to the viewers now.
Okay, bye.